So number one, who looked it up? What is the scientific definition of a theory? Good, Angelina. Explanation of a set of related observations or events based upon proven hypotheses and verified multiple times by different groups of researchers. Good. Yep. That is a scientific theory. It is different on how we use theory in everyday life, but a scientific theory has been researched and verified and has lots of evidence to back it up. All right, so what do you guys think? What kind of evidence do you think scientists use to prove the theory of evolution from Darwin all the way to today? Anybody have any ideas of what kind of evidence we could use? Artifacts and fossils, good. Anybody have any other ideas? Fossils and results from their experiments, yeah. There have been experiments done on fossils. Good. All right, so there is more than just fossils, which is what we will talk about. So our key concept, evidence of a common ancestry among species, comes from many sources. I didn't put any cue this time. You guys can make your own up. We're talking about the evidence for evolution, so what evidence do scientists use to prove the theory of evolution is a good one. But there are many lines besides fossils that we will talk about. So fossils is the first one. In Darwin's time, evidence for evolution came from many sources. Fossils was the most obvious. And people dig stuff up. You always see archaeologists digging in the ground. And they figured out that fossils in bottom layers of rock are more primitive or older than those in the upper layers. And this process is called relative dating. Older fossils are found at the bottom, relative or compared to the younger fossils found at the top. And they could take those fossils and they could compare them. And not only did they compare the fossils themselves, but they compared the surrounding rock and a bunch of other stuff. So fossils are evidence of life from the past. And besides its age, scientists can tell where it came from, what the environment was like when the organism was alive. And scientists that study fossils are called paleontologists. So they don't just study the fossil itself, they study the rock surrounding it. And they test it. They can see where it came from, what it was like, how much nitrogen or carbon was in the soil at the time, what kind of bacteria used to be there. Fossils and the rocks that surround them definitely tell a story. Another line of evidence that Darwin used and many scientists use today is called biogeography. This is one of your vocabulary words, so you should have looked it up already, but bio means life, and then geography is the different places that different types of life live. So Darwin was famous for the Galapagos Islands. That's where he spent a lot of his journey. And he studied these birds called finches. And he noticed that island species that were on the Galapagos Islands, they most closely resemble the nearest mainland species. And then populations can show much variation from one island to another. There's dozens of islands in the Galapagos Islands. It's a chain of islands, and the different finches or birds found on each island, they were related, but they were just a little bit different on each island. And they didn't resemble species on other islands, Australia, New Zealand, across the world. They resembled species from South America, which is the mainland that is very, very close to the Galapagos Islands. And that is how biogeography works. Which animals look like each other in which places? Embryology is another line of evidence. It's a study of embryos. Embryos are what babies are called when they're very, very, very tiny and they've just been fertilized. It goes from zygote to embryo. But Darwin noticed that embryos of crabs resembled the structure of a barnacle. And to him, this suggested a common ancestor between the two organisms. So on the left is a crab, on the right is a barnacle. And both of their larvae looked like the picture in the middle. That is their embryonic state, is a larva. So they had identical larvae, but different adult body forms. However, there are also organisms with similar embryos that belong to diverse organisms. So the barnacle and the crab have similar embryos. We have similar embryos to a lot of different animals. So one of those is human. Can you guys tell which one? Anybody? Yes, no, maybe? Can you guys tell which one of these is human? Let me know in the chat, yes or no. Not really. Yeah, no, can't really tell. What about from this panel? Can we tell which one's human? These are the same embryos, just a little bit older. Can anyone tell? Anyone want to guess which one is the human? Still no, yep. And then that is growing into their adult forms. They're obviously not complete adults yet, but now you can tell the difference. The first one is actually the embryo of a bat. Its fingers become their wings. That's what all that extra skin is about. The middle one is some kind of monkey or chimpanzee. And then on the right is a human. It looks like kind of an angry human, but that's a human. But all of our embryos all look very, very similar at one point in our life. We'll come back to the embryos in a minute. But another line of evidence is anatomy. It's the study of the structures of our body. And there's a few different structures that scientists look at. They look at homologous structures. So remember from chapter 6, the prefix homo means same and logos means structure. So homologous structures are similar in structure, but different in function. So in the picture, the structures are color-coded. All the pieces are there, but they look slightly different, and each animal uses them in a different way. And homologous structures are evidence of a common ancestor. So we know our arm bones. We have a radius, we have an ulna, we have a humerus, we have wrist bones, we have fingers. Well, dogs, birds, and whales have all those same bones. They each use them in a different way to walk or to swim or to fly, but the structure is the same beneath all the skin and muscles. So these are homologous structures, and these are evidence of a common ancestor. The opposite are called analogous structures. These have a similar function, but they are structurally different. If you remember what the word homologous means, same structural, you'll remember those have the same structure, but at different functions. These are the opposite, same function, but different structures. And these are not evidence of a common ancestor. These evolved all by themselves under different circumstances. So fins, shark, penguins, and dolphins all have fins. They all use them to swim, the same function, but underneath the structure is different. Same with wings, insects, birds, bats, they all have wings. They all use them to fly, but underneath the structure is different. You're going to have a lot of questions distinguishing between analogous and homologous structures on your quizzes this week, your attendance quizzes, and on your exam. So make sure you can tell the difference between them. Vestigial structures. So structural patterns are clues to the history of a species. We actually have quite a few vestigial structures. They're remnants of organs or structures that had a function in our early ancestor. When we saw the embryos, when we are embryos inside of our mother, tiny, tiny, we have gill slits. We don't need gills as an adult. We don't breathe underwater. We don't need to breathe underwater. But our ancestors did, and we still have gills at some point in our life. Wisdom teeth, those are vestigial structures. We don't need that many teeth anymore. Some people are evolving wisdom teeth out. I only had 2 wisdom teeth. I know people who only have 1 wisdom tooth. So that structure is going away completely in humans. And then our appendix. Scientists think it used to be a second stomach when we only used to eat, once a month. We eat multiple times a day now. We don't need a second stomach. So the appendix has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. It has absolutely no function inside of us. And all it does, if it gets infected, is make us sick. So those are vestigial structures. And then DNA. In Darwin's time, scientists didn't know much about DNA. We know much more now. They didn't even know the structure of DNA. That didn't come until the 1950s. Darwin was in the 1800s. So scientists have discovered the sequence of many organisms, including that of humans. So by comparing our actual DNA sequences, scientists can determine the evolutionary relationships between organisms. The chimpanzee is our closest organism relative, and we share 98% of our DNA in common. I think it's a little more than 98, 98.4 or something. And that 2% that's different, scientists know exactly which sequences those are and what they do in humans versus chimpanzees.